us and go 30 years, 50 years, even before Islam, to see what was going on and how that the characteristic that existed before Islam came to dominate the whole social structure of the Muslim community. They paid lip service. This is exactly what Imam Hussein says. الناس عبيد الدنيا والدين لاعق على ألسنتهم. They pay lip service to faith. Deep down, there is no conviction. As soon as they are confronted with calamities, very few become faithful. Luckily for us, 1,400 and some years or before, close to it, after that, we can assess the depth of the crisis that existed in the social structure at the time from what we call the saying of Imam Hussein that have been recorded, the slogans of Ashura that we see constantly. Imam Hussein refers to them, and a hadith that have been narrated from Imam Hussein. When we put them together, the first thing that strikes the researcher or reader of history is the materialistic lifestyle that existed at the time. Deen was being used to justify a lifestyle that was totally un-Islamic. And as a consequence, I mean, this hadith, الناس عبيد الدنيا, is a general statement that people are servants and slaves of the material life. It gives us, it depicts or gives us a picture of the social structure that existed at the time. That this material life, I'm deliberately choosing this issue because hopefully in the few nights that are coming, I want to make a comparison between our lives, contemporary life today, with the life that existed in the past. And warn each other, all of us, that mere utterance of few words or slogans is not enough to turn us into the true society that Islam wants from us. Imam says, الناس عبيد الدنيا. What are the characteristics of a social structure that majority of people become lovers of material? Deen and faith simply becomes an issue for few hours, weekend, or some occasional. I've heard communities that the Friday prayer is done on Sunday. Why? Because Friday prayer is a working day, and the excuse, look at how Deen is being used to justify this bid'ah and change. They say, well, Jum'ah was the holiday or the weekend during the life of the Holy Prophet. Now we have Saturday and Sunday. So we make it, Friday prayer is recited on Saturday or on Sunday, so that we do not go through the discomfort of going out of work for 1 hour on Friday and going to Friday prayer. So number one, Deen becomes a way to justify a material life. I just mentioned that there was a huge difference between the social structure that existed early on in the history of Islam with the one that became the prevalent or the way of life later. Wealth became, everybody was trying to become rich as quickly as possible. The wars that started and the wealth, the loot that was coming in from all around the world created even more emphasis that for those who were corrupt now to sell the special relationship that they had with the Holy Prophet for gaining wealth and power. Otherwise, how can we justify the so-called a number of Sahaba dying very close to Bani Umayyah or others, dying, and the wealth, the amount of gold that they had accumulated had to be broken by axe to be divided between their inheritance, while they were poor and the needy within Medina itself. To use, this is the so-called religious bourgeoisie that have taken over, used the concept of religion to justify. And this is a gradual process. If we look at it, number one, the first Khalif comes in and gives priority to Quraysh. That leadership is reserved for Quraysh only, irrespective of whether they are qualified or not qualified. The second Khalif comes, takes this little bit further and creates that. Remember the hadith from the Holy Prophet repeatedly during his life that says that لا فرق بين عربي وعجمي إلا بالتقوى. There is no difference between Arabs and non-Arabs. The criteria, the framework by which you judge the superiority or inferiority before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is how God-centric that person is. Suddenly we have second Khalif says Baytul Mal has to be given to Arab. Now Quraysh, the circle expanded to all Arabs, to the point where non-Arabs were put at a disfavor and were told in certain days not to come to Medina. And then Uthman comes to power. That idea of discrimination and racism that prevailed by the end of the life of the second Khalif was taken further. Bani Umayyah took control. So what are the characteristics of a social structure that is, the majority of people are materialistic? We go to, as I said, the slogans and the statements of Imam Hussein himself. أما بعد فقد نزل بنا من الأمر ما قد نزل وأن الدنيا قد تغيرت ألا ترون إن الحق لا يعمل به. The first characteristic of a society which is materialistic is that people never practice, or those who are materialistic never practice what is right. Right and wrong has now a new meaning. Those of you who have researched the concept of ethics in the West, and now it's part of the academia, there are classes that are taught in schools and universities in particular called ethics. Ethics, one of the different versions of it is what is called the utilitarian ethics, where rightness or wrongness is not essential within the act itself. It depends on the person who commits the act and whether he or she sees benefit or some kind of a gain from the act, then it becomes good or bad. If it provides me with benefit, then it is good. If it doesn't, then it is bad. Then the days in which acts themselves had an inherent value of what is of goodness and badness becomes irrelevant. Lying, when we have a society that is informed and gets the values, gets the aspiration from the revelation, it has a clear line, clearly defined line of what is right and wrong. But a society that uses religion and to justify a particular materialistic lifestyle doesn't believe in the notion that acts themselves have values, intrinsic values, or positive or negative. ألا ترون إن الحق لا يعمل به. This is why there is another hadith that the day will come in which people يأمرون بالمنكر وينهون عن المعروف. The reverse of our responsibility. Instead of encouraging good and discouraging evil, they encourage evil and discourage good. because the value system changes. Number two, where we have the issue of Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahy al Munkar, nobody even bothers to stand up and criticize. The Sahaba, the close associate of the Prophet, are being exiled and killed. Nobody says anything. If the cousin of Uthman becomes the wali of Kufa, goes to the mosque early in the morning, drunk, offers morning prayer, subh, which is technically 2 rak'ah, offers 4 rak'ah. And then after 4 rak'at, he turns to the congregation and says, since I feel happy, if you want, I can add another 2 rak'at to it. So Salat al-Subh becomes 6 rak'at. Did anyone stand up and say, for God's sake, there is a rule that Salat al-Subh is 2 rak'at? No. You have a wali drunk going to masjid, offering Salat al-Subh 4 rak'at. Nobody says anything. If it wasn't for Amir al-Mu'mineen, he would have stayed as wali of Uthman on Kufa. He insisted that, look, it's a clear and categorical violation of the rule. He has to be brought out, taken to Medina, and punished for it. Nobody wanted to say anything. Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahy al Munkar. Let's be frank, in our society today, when you see munkar and evil, are you prepared to challenge? Or you ignore it? In every, whether it's work environment, home environment, outside environment, within our own friends and community. So the second characteristic of a society which is materialistic is Amr bil Ma'ruf goes out. Sunnah and Kitabullah forgotten. Again, Ana ad'ukum. And by the way, with regard, if we go back to the comment of Imam Hussein, when in a wasiyah or a comment or a will that he left for his half-brother Muhammad al-Hanafiya, he says, Inni lam akhruj ashiran wala batar. The end of this, وَإِنَّمَا خَرَجْتُ لِطَلَبِ الْإِصْلَاحِ فِي أُمَّةِ جَدِّ رَسُولِ اللَّهِ أُرِيدُ أَنْ آمَرُ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ وَأَنْهَى عَنِ الْمُنكَرِ. I want to bring that notion, the culture, the habit that used to exist before, where Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahy al Munkar was part of the characteristics of the society and it's forgotten. I want to bring it back. Islah, revival, mending, changing the society, taking it back to the original path that it used to be. But Amr bil Ma'ruf is considered to be part of it. Inni ad'ukum ila kitabillah wa sunnat nabiyyah. Let's go back. Alaykum assalam. Let's go back to the book of God and the sunnah of the Holy Prophet. فَإِنَّ السُّنَّةَ قَدْ أُمِيتَتْ وَالْبِدْعَةُ قَدْ أُحْيَتْ. The sunnah is dead. Nobody cares. Again, if you look, contextualize it, you will see the type of society and social structure that existed at the time. It calls itself Muslim. It is possible for us to call ourselves Muslim, but only superficial and shallow practices of Islam becomes prevalent and everybody does. The essence of Islam, what we consider to be the foundation of Islam, is not. And social justice, Amr bil Ma'ruf, Sunnat Rasulullah, the application of the book of God in our life, etc., etc., to conduct a lifestyle in which we don't choose a religion to justify and rationalize a way of life, but we lead a life that rests on revelation and the book and Sunnah and Amr bil Ma'ruf and justice, as well as haqq and right. It's the reverse. Unfortunately, these days and those days, people chose a lifestyle that was convenient and comfortable. and then search around, finding various opinions that would justify their lifestyle. You look at the kutub and the books of Tariq that are narrated from our brothers Ahl Sunnah, particularly on the life of Uthman. When he is being criticized by people like Ibn Mas'ud, Abu Dhar, and so on, who does he turn to for justification? For a Jewish scholar that had recently converted to Islam and has become a very close associate of Uthman. He says, what do you think? Is it right or is it wrong? Khalifatul Muslimin wants justification of his action by a Jewish scholar that had recently converted to Islam. And you have people like Abu Dhar and other Sahaba criticizing him. He doesn't care. This is from a religious point of view. From political point of view, we really need to, again, to assess the history before the advent of Islam. If you look at the Arabian Peninsula before Islam, by the way, both by now, there are a huge number of books written by Western scholars as well as Muslim scholars and Arab scholars about the life and the history before the advent of Islam, before coming of Islam. What structured the life of Arabia before? Arabian Peninsula, due to the unique ecological as well as social structure, had to sustain a way of life that were primarily nomadic and tribal. Only few places that were oases and there was arable water or arable land or water could sustain what we call an urban living. It was rural living that people traveled. Depending on heat, they moved south or north. We have a verse in the Holy Quran that talks about this constant movement. The tribe had to move. Because most of the Arabian people at the time could not settle down. The only political structure that existed was a tribal structure. And in tribal structure is the leadership that decides. What dictates relationship is the blood relationship. There were two civilizations on the northern and northeastern part of Arabia, Arabian Peninsula at the time. They were the Byzantines as well as the Persian empires with their own civilization. And they tried to subdue these tribes and make them settle and lead an urban lives, but they failed. Simply because the ecological reason was not supporting a way of life that they could settle. There were some oases around the places where people gathered together, but in most cases, people were clans moving up and down. On the south, what today we call Yemen, again, there were some, because of arable land, people settled down. In Medina, Aus, Khazraj, and particularly the Jewish community were able to establish farms, etc., etc. Historical reason for Mecca and Baytullah that brought people and attracted people together. But generally speaking, what dictated the political structure was tribal. What brought people together is the blood linkage. And the absolute commitment to the command of the tribal leader. For them, again, we go back to the notion, to the concept of haqq and batil. We see that haqq becomes an issue that benefits the tribe in this atrocious and very difficult circumstance. What benefits the tribe becomes an issue that the tribe does, and what it doesn't, the tribe doesn't do. The survival of the tribe becomes a critical issue. Now, if we follow this, the Holy Prophet came and established a system in which blood relationship, the whole tribal structure was removed. value system was brought in. Human values were brought in. Goodness was brought in. How many of you have even read the early history of Medina? When the Holy Prophet goes to Medina, there is a pact which is signed under his own supervision, which some people call it in the academic environment, the Constitution of Medina, between Aus, Khazraj, and the Jewish community over there. If you go and read the 13 or 14 chapters, this what is called Constitution, it is clear that even Jews of Medina are brought and considered to be the Ummah at the time because they shared the goals and the objectives of the goals and the objective of the community that had converted to Islam. Instead of blood and tribal structure, brings in human values, goals, and structure, human values and goals to be the common denominator. And there is a debate in academia if Ummah of Islam is supposed to be purely those who had converted to Islam, or some way they are associated with Islam. How can we see in this constitution Jews are called part of the Ummah? If you look at the text, it's clear. It says because they share the value of the others. They are concerned about the safety of the city. They would like to contribute for the value of this, the safe keep of the city, etc., etc. This is a value that the Holy Prophet brought in and replaced the tribal structure with such value. By the year 20 and beginning of Uthman's leadership, all this was forgotten. Bani Umayyah dictated their representatives, irrespective. If you look at again to the Holy Prophet's life, before he sends somebody somewhere to become his wali and representative, it's the inner character that becomes the defining factor, whether the person is qualified or not. The spirituality, the value, human value, concern for the poor, standing for social justice, etc., etc. By the third Khilafah, these are not the issues. It's the cousins, the nephews, and the others of one tribe or the other that becomes inherently qualified to lead the community. Otherwise, how can you send somebody, an alcoholic, to lead a community, a Muslim community in Kufa, in a sensitive area? And read it in the history. Mas'udi is one of the books that dwells into this, and just read and see what he says about these individuals. And then you will find out the challenge that Amir al-Mu'mineen had in trying to now reverse something that the previous structure for close to 35 years or 25 years of history have become ingrained in the mind of the social of people, Islamic Muslim of the early stage. And after the martyrdom of Amir al-Mu'mineen, remember, during the life of Amir al-Mu'mineen, he made it clear that what dictates, the new administration comes in, and the policy statements is clear. You look at any government these days, as soon as a new government takes over, they have a policy statement. This is what we're going to do. Ali says social justice is going to dictate, to become the fundamental principle of my new administration. And this is why everybody tried to criticize. And see during his life how much emphasis he had on the issue of social justice. His wali in Basra, his representative in Basra, during the month of Ramadan goes to the house of a wealthy individual for iftar. As soon as he hears about it, dismisses the wali. This is, just read Nahj al-Balagha. his comment to this representative is a striking, completely compared to the way the other khulafa used to deal with their own representative. He says, how could you go to a wealthy individual's house and fill your stomach, while in your neighborhood there were those who do not remember last time where their stomach was full? You are my representative. I lead the simplest life. You should reflect. You should imitate. You should do exactly as I do. How could you go and eat so much? You don't deserve the office that you are supposed to occupy. Muawiyah comes to power, and within the 30 some years, 20 years or 30 years, crossed between 20 to 25 years, that left after the demise, the martyrdom of Amir al-Mu'mineen, around 40 to year 60, 20 extra years. He literally dismantled everything that Islam, that the Holy Prophet did, and what Amir al-Mu'mineen tried to imitate. This is a critical issue that I intend to discuss in the coming nights. But because I have listened to a number of speakers during the month of Muharram, we tend to have a picture of Imam Hussein only as through the lens of Ashura, or even the best we can do the 5 or 6 months before Ashura. We seem to forget that Ashura is a culmination of 55 years of service and submission to the command of God, teaching, etc., etc. Unique characteristics that nobody talks about. Everyone talks about Ashura, what happened in Ashura. The historical factors: Imam left Medina in the month of Rajab, went to Mecca, stayed there, delivered few sermons, criticized the social structure, and then on a few days before Hajj came out and moved towards Kufa from the path of Ghadir, and so on. Such a day, on the second, on the night or the day of the 2nd of Muharram, he reached what we call plain of Karbala and settled the tents. The first group of people that came, Hurr ibn Yazid, comes with 1,000 horsemen, challenges, asks, what are you doing here? These are normally the historical issues that we cover. But Hussein and Abi Abdullah salam, when he was martyred, he was 55 years old, just few months over. What happened to this person from the beginning of his birth to the moment of Shahada? Because we really don't understand Imams, it's very easy to make mistake. Well, criticize him. 10 years he was Imam during the life of Muawiyah. Why didn't he rise up before? These are the factors that I mentioned tonight, and I repeated last night when we analyzed them. It was this relationship, the chemistry between the leadership and the people, the popular support, that simply wasn't there. It was only after the demise of Muawiyah that 120,000 signatures come to him, inviting him to come to Kufa and lead. These are the Sahabas, most of them, that had seen Amir al-Mu'mineen, at least, even if the Holy Prophet was not seen. They had seen Amir al-Mu'mineen and they invited him. Some of them were still remnant of Sahaba that had seen the Holy Prophet. And this is, inshallah, an issue that I intend to discuss tomorrow night. As I said last night, I normally allow 10 minutes for question and answer. If you have any questions, I would certainly attempt to answer them. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. اللهم صل وسلم على محمد وآل محمد اللهم صل وسلم على محمد وآل محمد. Seems there is no question, so well, thank you very much anyway.